Welcome to the Pioneer Podcast. This is Ernst Roots. And today we are talking about AfriForum, the rise of AfriForum over the last 2 decades in South Africa, the incredible work that AfriForum is doing, and also some lessons that we think people might learn from AfriForum's experience over the last few decades here in the southern tip of the African continent. And with me in studio to discuss this today is Kallie Kriel, the CEO of AfriForum. Kallie, welcome.
Yeah, thank you so much, Ernst. It's an honor to speak to you.
Yeah, thank you. And for our viewers who are Afrikaans speaking, this is an English podcast. It's primarily aimed at our friends abroad. And thank you for coming and sharing with us your ideas and your experience with AfriForum. So perhaps a good way just to sort of set the table for the conversation is just to explain what AfriForum is, because we find it as something that is quite obvious, but it's also something that's very unique in a certain sense to the South African context. For example, it's outside of party politics, but just give an overview. How can we make sense of or understand AfriForum?
Yeah, of course, AfriForum is involved in quite a number of things, but to try and sum it up, we are a community-based organization, a non-governmental organization, a non-profit organization, but our roots are within the Afrikaner community. And for those people that watch your podcast, of course, would know that Afrikaners, we are actually an African tribe with Western roots. We come from the Dutch, the Germans, the French, and a number of others that settled here and became a new people. So we are an African people. So AfriForum works to preserve our Western heritage, but also to create circumstances where Afrikaners can live and have a future here on the southern tip of Africa. And there's a number of ways we go about that, but also just with regard to AfriForum's worldview, we are a conservative organization. I think Afrikaners are one of the few peoples in the world, Western peoples, that are mostly conservative, that are mostly Christian, and that believe in the strength of community. And that is also where AfriForum's strength lies, is that we focus on conservative values, preserving that what we got from those that lived and worked before us, and to improve that, to give it to those that are yet to be born. And that is AfriForum's calling, and we do that by focusing on grassroots level practical projects. So we are not philosophical. We have within the solidarity movement, we have, of course, important development of ideas. You would have spoken to many of the people that create or think about these ideas, but AfriForum is a practical organization that has to make sure that these ideas are taken to grassroots level and get implemented in practical projects.
And so in the mission statement of AfriForum, it talks about a double strategy. Can you explain what this double strategy is?
Yes, of course, to survive in Africa and to make sure that our Western roots are preserved, we cannot have only one strategy. We have to have this two-pronged approach. To sum the one up is that we are a watchdog organization. I think it's very important, also in terms of our conservative values, that we conserve the rule of law, we conserve the free market, we conserve the freedom of the press, but we also conserve our Western heritage as well as our language and culture. And when that is under attack, you have to make sure that you take a stance against it as a watchdog. And you can do that by getting international support, going to courts and mobilizing people. But it's not only conserving as a watchdog, it's also to take on injustice. People abroad that would have followed the news would have seen that we've gone through a period of state capture, huge corruption, where we've seen actually the collapse of municipality due to corruption, but also due to incompetence of people being appointed simply because of their loyalty to the ruling party and being incompetent for a job. So, and we have to play a watchdog role to make sure that those that steal are held accountable, those that don't do their job are held accountable. So that's our watchdog role. In the second place, and that's the biggest focus for us, is to build alternatives. And if you, just to illustrate it, if you have a house that is burning, it's important to have a watchdog that will go in with a fire extinguisher and make sure that you fight the fire. But it's also important to build another house. In the meantime, if you're not always successful with extinguishing the fire, you have an alternative. So we're focusing together with the Solidarity Movement on building alternative, self-sufficient institutions. So if there's a problem with safety, we would play a watchdog role to keep the police accountable. But our biggest focus would be to make sure that we set up our own safety structures. And that two-pronged approach is something that is actually within the whole Solidarity Movement. That is part of how it works. For instance, AfriForum would go to court to make sure that mother tongue education in Afrikaans universities and schools are preserved. But at the same time, other institutions within the movement would then make sure that we set up alternative universities, artisan training schools, where the Western Christian culture can have a place where it can survive, free of woke influence.
And so then the big controversial question, or at least people think it's a controversial question, is the funding. So who funds AfriForum? Who's behind all these initiatives?
Yeah, well, if you use a popular term, it is called crowdfunding. We have in South Africa, unfortunately, that big business, they are scared of government. So because we play a watchdog role, we take the South African government to court when they give 50 million rand to Cuba. And we go to court to stop that. So any business, or unfortunately many businesses, are scared to be seen that they take a stance against the socialist government, supporting countries that are extremely anti-Western. So those companies, many of them behind closed doors, they would say that they agree with what we're doing, but openly they won't fund us. So we then said, well, let's then focus on the normal public, normal people, and if you have many people, each giving a small contribution, it creates circumstances or gives you the resources to be able to go to court with the best lawyers, to be able to have plans that are workable. But of course, the big problem is you have to now take the role that the state plays, because service delivery is collapsing in many places. We have to start doing that, but we don't get taxpayers' income. So we have to do it with membership fees, which are low, so it's actually not possible. But therefore, we went to find volunteers. We have 165 branches, 177 neighborhood watches, with 10,000 volunteers. So a lot of the work we are doing are people that are not paid, that are volunteers that would say, let's fix our roads, let's fix the infrastructure. And that is how we're able to fund this. But of course, if somebody is watching and they want to support some of our projects, that would be highly appreciated.
Yes, of course. And so, looking at the AfriForum story from the outside, one might say yes, well, it's easy to do these things if you have 100,000 members, or in AfriForum's case, 300,000 members. But it's not quite possible to start something like this without a massive injection of capital. And so tell us a bit about how to start an institution like this.
Yeah. Well, it's a hard thing to do. We started just over 18 years ago. And fortunately, I didn't know how hard it would be 18 years ago. But looking back, we received a lot of grace, and the fact is things just moved in the right direction, but not on its own, of course. It was hard work. Sometimes there are failures, but if you are driven by calling, if something doesn't work, you don't lie down and say it's a failure. You just keep on doing it until you are successful. And I remember when AfriForum started, it was a new brand name, if I want to use marketing terms. Nobody knew it was. We had no success record and we had no support. We started with 3 staff members, no members. And how do you then start such a thing, and how do you get momentum? And as you've mentioned, it's a chicken-egg situation, because to get support, you have to have success. But to get success, you have to have support. So we started small, and I think that is something that communities should know. Sometimes it's like looking at an elephant and say, how are we going to eat this elephant? You just start with small bites. So we started very, very small with a number of strategic campaigns. For instance, taking on the Zimbabwean government when they stole or ignored property rights. And we had a success pressurizing, for instance, Nestle not to buy milk from Grace Mugabe, the then president's wife, that illegally got a dairy farm. And when we were successful with that, it started creating the impression that we were strong, and we had to portray ourselves as being strong with these kind of small successes. And as it went along, and also as the pressure against Afrikaners grew in the new dispensation, I think people started realizing that we cannot just sit back and become a victim of history. We will have to write our own history. And the way to do that is to have strong institutions. And that was the basis on what not only AfriForum was built, but the whole solidarity movement. And it was a slow process. We started in 2006. We were only able in 2012 to start with local structures. But it was just one branch doing little things. But it has grown since then. We are now 200 staff members from the 3 that we had. But we are now concentrating on a broad spectrum, doing basic things. Well, for us it's basic. People elsewhere would think, how can the community fix roads? For us it's basic. There's a pothole. Get somebody that knows how it works, get the community to buy tar and do the job. You start small, but then you go further to say, well, now we can start cleaning up our communities. Even get water solutions. Of course, we still have regulatory problems in a sense that we cannot simply take over a waterworks of a municipality. But in those places where we were able, through court action, to take it over, the water infrastructure worked. When it was taken away from us again, it stopped working. So you're going to build up this to actually have, in the end, self-sufficient communities. Because we are not looking at government for solutions, and that might sound quite weird to many people that are used to government doing things. But for us, we had to make that mind shift to say, we are not looking at government to give us solutions. In fact, government sometimes governs against us. So how do you act without government resources, with a government that is in many cases hostile? What do you do? And then you put your focus on saying, well, we've got these hands, we've got a brain. Some are more clever than I am, but at least I know them. And you have a calling, and then you say, well, what can we do ourselves? And I believe in the end that will be the survival of Afrikaners and its western roots here on the southern tip of Africa, where we have built our community so strong that we are not dependent on government, or as little dependent on government. And I'm quite happy over the last 18 years, AfriForum has come a long way. But of course, we need to remain humble in a sense that there is lots more to be done. And what we have started is a good beginning, but it's only the basis to make sure that our community gets stronger and stronger to take control with regard to nearly every aspect of their lives.
Mm-hmm. And so when you say that AfriForum is not working for government solutions, many of our friends outside of South Africa, especially in the international conservative movement, to use this term, are in some ways aligned, either part of a political party or aligned with a political party. So we have these think tanks or institutions sort of surrounding a particular party, but that is not our approach. So what is AfriForum's view on voting then? Does it regard voting as irrelevant, or what is the role of party politics when it comes to the work of AfriForum?
Well, I think in the many Western countries, you have parties that are competing closely, and every election you might have a different government. If the one fails, if you look at the US, it's the Republican Party and Democratic Party, and if one fails, people can mobilize the other way. As Afrikaners, as a group, we are demographically too small to win an election. So there will never be an Afrikaner government. Afrikaners might play a role in some way, in some kind of coalition government, but would also always be a very small part of that. But of course, we ask our members to go and vote. We believe it's important to go and vote. But voting is in our country one thing you do twice in 5 years, maybe, if you look at local and national and provincial government. But we believe much more is needed in our situation, because irrespective if you vote, the government will not be able to look after the interests of the community. Well, it's actually the case with all communities. So we also want to promote the self-sufficient, self-help, do-it-yourself approach in all communities, to say communities have to take control of their own destiny. The future we're going to have in this country, if we're going to have the government create the future, it won't be a good future. We want the future we want is the one we'll only get if we build that future ourselves.
I remember once using this term mutual recognition and respect to someone in Washington, who then took out a pen and a notebook and said, I have to write this down because this is in some ways the core of what it means to be conservative. And so what is AfriForum's approach to mutual recognition and respect in South Africa?
Yes, I think the mutual recognition and respect is the opposite of the cancel culture. Because we know in our country we have a diverse peoples, and that have differences on many issues. The Afrikaners are people that support property rights, individual ownership, free market, but there are also groups that support communal economies. And for us to say, well, we cannot, as a smaller group, tell other people how they should conduct themselves, and that's a good thing. Otherwise, other communities will try to tell us how we should conduct ourselves. And we're building on this this model to say South Africa or Southern Africa is a community of communities. There are a number of building blocks. We've got 12 official languages in the country, and you have socialist politicians that would want to make sure that these communities are polarized. So what we are doing on grassroots level is to say we're not going to allow an elite group to alienate or isolate us, because there is an effort to isolate Afrikaners, but we overcome that with our policy of mutual recognition and respect, going into agreements with other cultural communities. His Majesty the Zulu King was at one of our events the other day, and I think people abroad would probably know, if they think of cultural groups or peoples in the country, the Zulus are probably one of the most well known, and of course the Afrikaners are also well known under the term Boere. So there is cooperation between the Boers and the Zulu people, and that strengthens us. So we cannot be isolated. Also, with other communities such as the Barolong Buseleka, the Amabele communities, where we say, let's respect one another, let's cooperate, but also let's respect the heritage of one another. That would also, of course, mean that we also want people to respect our Western heritage. And that is our formula, and we are happy that we are actually building new coalitions. And the woke, of course, don't like it. They want to make sure that people are polarized, use the cancel culture to say these Afrikaners are conservative, so it means that they are evil and we should have nothing to do with them. They should actually just be silenced, like a fascist kind of approach to silence you. But we are working against that. And mutual recognition and respect is not only the right thing to do, it's also the best strategy.
And so a last question, I remember you making the remark recently that even though the political situation in South Africa has gotten worse and there are many concerns about the government and so forth, you now are more optimistic about the future than you were 10 years ago, when in many ways things were better in South Africa. Why and how are you more optimistic when things have deteriorated more? Can you explain that?
Well, I think 20 years ago, 25 years ago, when the flip base took over and was the initiating solidarity and the solidarity movement, I think it's not because we were prophets that could foresee what, because we were clever. We just had to look at history. What happens if a socialist government takes over? And you could have looked in Africa, you could have looked in elsewhere in the world, like Venezuela, a number of other places, that such a country fails. So you had this very positive attitude internationally towards South Africa, which of course was great. You had this euphoria of Nelson Mandela and the miracle taking place. But unfortunately, I think what many people did not see was the socialist basis of the new government. So that is actually worrying. If people are all very happy, of course we want people to be happy,
yes.
But if they are happy and they don't see what the path is that we are going to walk. So we then had to start saying, well, if there's going to be a deterioration in the country, if institutions are going to start failing, if the infrastructure is going to be worse, if there's going to be corruption, all these things that you don't have to be a rocket scientist, that's what happens in socialist countries. And then you say, what are we going to do against it? And it's demoralizing if you say, well, we actually have nothing to work against that. So today, we are happy that we have the solidarity movement, a university, artisan training, a media institution, a strong trade union, a cultural organization, a watchdog organization such as ourselves, this podcast as amongst others. So we have all these institutions that we can work against the woke culture, that is a wave that is going across the world at the moment. And that gives me hope, because at least now we have the means at our disposal. And I think that is for any community that wants to survive, The reality is we see the woke culture taking over institutions worldwide, universities, schools, media institutions, even big business. And the question is, we need to ask ourselves, well, of course, we would want to stop it. And in many countries where you have a big enough numbers, you can, through an election, take it on. Yeah. We won't be able to do it through an election, but what we can do is to set up our own institutions that preserves our Western culture, that preserves the conservative worldview, that preserves our Christian worldview, that preserves family values, that preserves the strength of communities. And that is our formula. Build your own institutions and then build your future on that to make sure that when the next generation come, they can look back and say, a few years or 100 or 200 years ago, there were people that were, let us call us then the founding fathers of a new route for the Afrikaner people. And that is so exciting to be able to be part of this broad movement to say, we are in Africa, we are going nowhere, we are not going to give up our Western culture, we are going to remain a Christian people, but we are able to make plans to make sure that we survive.
Kallie Kriel, thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you, Ernst. It was great.
Hi, I'm Ernst Ritz. If you support this podcast and the work that we are involved with as the Afrikaner Foundation and the broader solidarity movement in South Africa, I want to encourage you to become a more active supporter. You can do this first and foremost by subscribing to our various social media channels, by leaving a comment and sharing what you have seen. But other than that, also by making a small monthly contribution to the work that we are doing through the Afrikaner Foundation's website, or by making a once-off donation. Links in the description.